started. So I'm going to give a talk about design. I spent the last couple of years working in enterprise software, so that's kind of where a lot of it's coming from. But my goal with this talk is to kind of be a bit more inclusive than that. It's not all about enterprise. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about will apply to software design or design anywhere. And I'm also kind of doing a broad, narrow slice. I took a look at the other talks that are going on at this conference, and I kind of touch on a lot of those things, so I'm not going very deep, but I'm going kind of broad, and hopefully kind of look at it, since I'm the first in this track, as like a little bit of an appetizer. I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions too, so if anything you see up here looks interesting, because I'm going to cover a lot of different stuff, save those questions, and at the end I'll take some time and we can talk about it. So, my name is Keith Robinson. I realized a couple days ago that I've been doing design work for almost 20 years, which is kind of crazy. So I started out at a huge enterprise huge enterprise company, Boeing. I was working on learning and development software, mostly for managers. I was kind of one of those, I guess, maybe a UX dev. I was a developer that worked with designers who did not have much experience with the web or software at all, so traditional graphic designers. And I was kind of a designer and kind of a front-end engineer, but at the time, front-end engineering was a lot different. We didn't even have CSS at that point. So lots of tables, lots of hard-coded. We built 2 sites for everything that we did, one for Netscape and one for Internet Explorer. 2 browsers, which I don't think even exist anymore. I guess Internet Explorer, maybe a little bit. But over the years, I've worked for many, many different types of people, many companies. I've worked for a children's hospital up in Seattle. I have my own business, building web apps and things. I've worked for startups. And most recently, I've been in kind of like big enterprise software type companies. I didn't choose to go that route. I was working for a startup called Assistly, which is sort of like Zendesk, if you've ever heard of that. That got acquired by Salesforce. So, got acquired, worked at Salesforce on, well, it's desk.com now, but it was Assistly then. And I worked for Heroku, which is, there's some developers in here, you're probably familiar. It's application hosting as a service, I guess. They don't like to use the word hosting, but for me that makes the most sense. And now I work for Atlassian. So if you're familiar with Jira, or HipChat, or Confluence, that's the company I work for. I actually work on Bitbucket, which is a developer tool. It's kind of like GitHub. So I have a lot of experience working with engineers, both Atlassian and Salesforce, and a lot of the startups that I've worked for have been engineering-led companies who are relatively new to design. So a lot of my talk is going to be about that kind of stuff. Like how does a designer work with engineers, how does a designer that's in a company that doesn't traditionally value designers, new to learning about the value of user experience, what are the kind of things that you can do to make that an easier transition? So just real quickly, I'll talk about Atlassian. How many of you are familiar with Atlassian? Okay, almost everybody. So they're an Australian company. They're traditionally engineering centered. Jira is the biggest product. I would say most companies that are building software, they're not using Jira, they're probably familiar with it. And we've kind of got this like, it's for developers, but it's also big scale, behind the firewall, lots of engineering challenges. So design traditionally at Atlassian hasn't been at the forefront, but that's been changing the last 4 or 5 years. I've been there a little over a year. I joined the design team. We were about 60 people. We're over 100 now. And it's kind of becoming a big deal, which is great. But we're still in that kind of transition from engineering, let's just build it, make sure it works, to really understanding our customers and really trying to come up with user experiences that make our products easier to use. It's very hard. We have a lot of technical debt. We have a lot of design debt that we need to work through. So it's been fun, but it's been a challenge, and a lot of my talk is going to be about some of the things that we're trying and how that's working as we move forward into this. I don't like the word design-led, but that's the way some people, like our VP of design, he likes to use that. So, this is something that I hear a lot about. Enterprise companies needing to be more consumer. You know, why can't we be more like Twitter? You know, why can't we be more like Facebook? Well, some of it's obvious. Something like Jira, it's never gonna be anything like Twitter, and it shouldn't be. But the way that people kind of frame those discussions, I've sort of split it into two they're kind of opposites, right? Like traditionally, consumer, easy to use, it's modern, clear, focused, it's fast, good performance, it's kind of fun. You know, we at Atlassian, I think it's an Australia thing, we use with a wink. Yeah, so, and then enterprise, it's complicated, dated, confusing, slow, kind of boring. And in our research, how many of you are familiar with Net Promoter Score, NPS surveys? You know, they ask you if you would like to recommend this product to somebody else. I read thousands of verbatim comments. I'll talk a little bit about that later. It's a project that I'm working on, but we hear these things a lot. It's too complicated, it's boring, it looks kind of dated, it does what it's supposed to do, but GitHub's better, you know. Yeah, we get that one a lot. So, what are the kind of things that designers and UX people, and developers, whoever, how can we help make those things kind of, you know, make an enterprise be more fun, or less complicated, whatever. And I've kind of broken this talk into 4 different things. The first one is kind of processy, you know, like how can you set yourself up for success as a designer in a large company, or a small company, or a company that just doesn't get the value of design. And then the last 3 are kind of, they get a little bit more specific as they go along. So I'm going to be talking about research and testing and some things you can do if you don't have experience doing that, and some things you can do just kind of on your own. I'm going to talk about complexity. The main reason why is because in any enterprise product that I've worked on over the years, complexity is something that, it's kind of like this double-edged sword. It's like kind of a bad thing, but you also don't want to like take power away from people. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about consistency, which is also something that plagues a lot of, you know, enterprise software companies. Just over the years you build up design debt, you build up tech debt, and things start to get a little bit janky. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and give some examples. So let's talk about inclusive design, which is a term I made up like 2 weeks ago. So this is just something I think about a lot of work. And what it is it's like part of my job is to design products. I'm a product designer. Part of my job is to make sure that the engineers on my team, the product managers on my team, the marketing people on my team let me do what I want to do. So I need to make sure that they understand about our users. I need to make sure that they understand the value of what I'm doing. We do a lot of internal promotion at Atlassian, and it's helped a ton. I was not into it when I started there, but it does help. So sharing, you know, telling, like when we do something good, we pimp it out. You know, we're like, we did this was us. We have a lot of that. So I'm going to talk about these 3 things in a little bit of detail. I assume all of you were at the keynote. So I'm really big on soft skills as well. The main reason why is because throughout the years, those skills have helped me in my career more than anything else. I know how to do HTML. I know how to do JavaScript. I can do some of these things. I can work Photoshop. I can work Sketch. I can do these things. That's not where most of my work is spent. And I've also found that developing soft skills has allowed me to pick up those harder skills faster and easier. So I'm not afraid to go sit down and try to learn Angular, for example, if I need to do that for a product or project. Not that I would necessarily have to. We have great front-end and UX engineers at Atlassian, but if I were to, I'm not afraid of that because of the soft skills that I've built up. And I think as a designer, that's something that you have to do a lot of. You have to constantly be learning new things, curiosity, digging into things. So with all of these things, practice is important. And it's weird for me sometimes, and maybe it's not for you, but for me, it's weird to think about practicing soft skills. So practicing things like saying thank you, I think was one of the things that came up. I don't talk about that specifically, but I agree with that. Yeah, it's something you can practice, right? You can practice that. So just keep that in mind as I go through these. So before I get into the actual soft skills, this is stuff that I have this slide in all of my talks. So Shoshin, which is beginner's mind, it's essentially just being open-minded and willing to learn new things. I feel like with soft skills or hard skills, it's just a good thing to practice. That is this great quote by Shunryu Suzuki, who wrote a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert mind, there are few. As a designer working with engineers, this has helped me more than anything else, because generally, they approach things differently. And if you don't allow that to happen, you don't really get the full benefit of collaborating with people who have a different mindset than you. So, you know, the engineer in the story from the keynote, he might have benefited from some of this, and vice versa, I should say. So, active listening, to me, this is one of the most important soft skills that a designer can develop. And all it really is just really paying attention when somebody else is talking, not trying to talk over them, not trying to interject, really thinking about what they're saying. If you are speaking, reiterate what you heard, that kind of thing. I just think that this is something that, because a designer, especially in a diverse team, or a team that's even heavy on other skill sets, this is like probably #1 thing that you can do, is just teach yourself how to listen better. And this is just a quote that I thought illustrated that. It's by Robert Hookman. Sometimes the most appropriate technological solution is a person talking to another person. I totally believe that. Like, we're not always in a room, like, sketching things out or working in code. Most of the time, we're just talking and trying to solve problems that way. And along those lines, asking questions. Kind of a no-brainer, but I know that for me in my career, there's been many times when, as sort of a lone designer or a designer that's not on a team with other designers, you're kind of put in a position where you feel like you should know the answers to things. I mean, I don't know if there's any designers in the room that can identify with this, but I still get it, the comments like, well, you're the designer, you tell me how this is supposed to work. That's super intimidating, and sometimes you're like, I don't know how it's supposed to work. That's what we're trying to figure out right now, but a lot of times you'll get this. And so there's two parts to this. There's asking questions, and also being okay with not knowing the answer to a question. Like if we go into Q&A later today and you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm really comfortable with this now. I will say, I don't know. We can find out together, we can talk about it, I can look it up, think about it. But if I don't know the answer, I don't pretend like I do anymore. And that's something I used to do when I was younger all the time. Always pretending like I knew what I was talking about, and then I'd walk off, cry, and do a lot of research. So this quote, I think about this quote a lot. It's from Jason Santamaria, who's an amazing designer. Asking questions is at the heart of collaboration, more so than any project management software process. And if you want to truly collaborate, I've found you need to allow yourself to be someone without the answers. To me, this and listening are like at the heart of the kind of soft skills thing, And we can call it empathy and all those other things, but really it's about communicating, it's about learning how to express yourself, how to be okay with not knowing something, how to ask questions and trust other people to help you out. I could add a bunch of other things into this, but I've got a bunch of other things to talk about. And then the last thing I wanted to have about soft skills is just writing. So much of my work is done via text communication. I have to write up explanations of why certain design decisions are made. We have this great thing at Atlassian called decision registers that I make use of every day. And that's basically when we have a discussion, I create a decision register that's like an official thing where everybody can chime in, and then we make a decision, and it's there's the page, So everybody remembers, especially when projects drag out for months, which they often do in large companies. And also just the other thing about this is when you're designing for software, one of your big mediums is text, it's words. I mean, a lot of my design work is what's this error message say, or how am I conveying these things? We do have writers, or we call them IXers, information experience, is what that stands for. But I work with them all the time, and they're essentially just a specialized form of designer. So writing is another thing that I think is really important as far as soft skills go. Okay, so lean teamwork. This is pretty straightforward, and it's also very hard in enterprise companies to try to keep teams small. I'm on a team right now I'm like 45 people. And it's fine, but it's also kind of hard to manage. So, especially when you're talking about project work, like the day-to-day, you want to keep your team small, meetings especially small. And Jeff Bezos has this great quote, if you can't, I don't know if it's actually a quote, but whatever, we're going to say it. If you can't feed a team with 2 pizzas, it's too large. Meaning the team is too large, not the pizzas. I totally buy that. Like if you have a team with too many people, it just becomes unwieldy. People's voices don't get heard. It's just too hard to manage. So number one with lean teamwork is just try to scope your teams as small as you can. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Has anybody read this book, Creativity Incorporated? It's by Ed Catmull and other folks, who was one of the founders of Pixar. It's a really good book. It's got really great stories in it. In fact, they talk a lot about the newest movie, Inside Out? Is that what it's called? But they don't use the name. So it's talking about it before it got made. So that's pretty interesting. Anyways, he's saying that getting the right people and the right chemistry is more important than getting the right idea. And that's generally true. I mean, ideas are, everybody has ideas. Execution is what really matters, and having a good team is really central to that. And then I'm a big fan of diversity. This is Spock talking about diversity. I've worked with a lot of different types of people, and this is one of the reasons why I think this conference is cool, because it's like you have 2 differing types of ways of thinking, and that's a really powerful way to solve problems. So if you are doing design work and you can include engineers, and it doesn't have to be the UX engineers, it can be back-end engineers, it can be anybody, that's a really good thing. You get some ideas and you get some ways around problems that you would not get without doing that. And diversity, and I think about diversity in numerous different ways. Race, gender, ways of thinking, background, whatever. Mix it up. It's always, in my experience, it's always been better. So we have this concept at Atlassian, we call it the triad, and essentially all decisions have to represent these 3 groups when we're talking about products. That's the goal anyways. Design usually has the hardest job here. It's a lot harder for designers to kind of get represented in this triad than it is for the engineers and the PMs. But this is the goal, and it's something that we're trying to make a big deal at Atlassian because of that diversity thing, the small team thing, and also just all being on the same page about what it is that we're building and who we're building it for, etc. So, the last part is design thinking. So, is anybody familiar with design thinking? So, essentially, I'll just cover it real quick. I'm going to share my slides. I have links and things in here. The D School came up with this process for design thinking that I like. I use it at work a lot. When I worked at Salesforce, I used this all the time. But it's essentially this flow of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and then test. And essentially, what this is, I've sort of broken it out of what they use it for, and I kind of put it into the way that we do workshops and envisioning, we call it, every once in a while, where we just sort of tackle big problems and try to come up with ideas with a multi-functional group of people. And essentially, it's talking to people, synthesizing that information, and then sharing it out. Sketching out ideas. I put everyone can draw and volume is key because I've run a bunch of sessions where we do sketching and there's always a handful of people that are terrified to draw and that makes me sad because like every little kid knew how to draw, and some of us just forgot along the way. You don't have to draw good. That's awesome English. You don't have to draw well. But the idea is just to sketch out a lot of ideas, prototype, building something that you can test, and then testing, gathering feedback, and then iterating on the prototype. So, I think most design processes follow something around this type of thing. And what's cool about this when it comes to inclusive design is there's this free course that you can get from the D School that is great for introducing people who are not familiar with design to design. It's really easy to run. It's probably very similar to the hackathon thing that's going to happen on Saturday, is my guess. When they're describing it, I sort of was like, I wonder if it's the same thing or something similar. But this is great for people, if you do have people in your organization that you work with who are not familiar with the way design works. Try this out. It's worked well for me. And, it doesn't really teach them how to design, but it kind of gets them in the same mindset. All right, so that was it for inclusive design. So a big part of my job throughout the years has been research. I've worked with teams, for example, when I was at Salesforce, where we had dedicated researchers, and that was awesome. But research to me is something that needs to happen with ideally everybody that's working on a product. So that's just obviously it's very important, I think, obviously, for designers, but also important for engineers, PMs, marketing people, managers. And the main reason why is because you need to get people to learn about who they're building something for. It's a big topic. I'm not going to go way deep into it because the details here, there's just a lot. The important thing to note is that it's all about building up empathy. And it's kind of like that thing where it's like, in my opinion, there's no limit to how much empathy or how much research you can do. I mean, obviously, sometimes you do it and it's not great. You don't learn anything, or you feel like it's also very time consuming. But I feel like it's something that if you're not doing, it's something that you should at least start trying to do. When I started at Assistly, the company that got acquired by Salesforce, they'd never done any research. It was all, I guess, what you would call genius design. Like the CEO had an idea and they got pretty far with that. So when I started there, I was lucky enough to know a bunch of people whose companies used that product. So for the first 2 months, I didn't do any design work. And the CEO, who was a friend of mine, just was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm going out and talking to people every day. Like, I'm talking to your customers. And once he understood that I was not just like twiddling my thumbs, he was okay with it. But it was really good for everybody because I was able to add sort of a design perspective to things that they already know. They had really good salespeople and really good support people. They were support products, so obviously they would have good support people. So they did have a pretty good handle on what their customers were wanting and thinking about, but they didn't have somebody who could then kind of like synthesize that into like product recommendations. And I believe that it helped me in 2 ways. One, building empathy and knowing our customers. B, it helped me learn the product. Like, I'm a product designer. I've worked on many products. It's not possible to come into a team not understanding their product and be able to kick ass immediately. It takes a while. You have to learn the product. And learning it through a customer's eyes is great. At the end of the day, research is just talking to people. How you do that, there's tons of different ways. And if there's any use researchers in the room, I'm not trying to like downplay the job. I'm just trying to say at the end of the day, it's talking to people. Not shouting, that's my niece, not shouting at people like she's doing. So what are some ways that you can like get this ball rolling if you don't have a dedicated researcher? Surveys. If you have access to your customers, you can send them surveys. You don't get amazing information out of that, but it's probably better than nothing. Interviews. This is something that I do a ton of. In fact, I'm in the middle of a process right now at Atlassian. We've kind of been working on performance and UX improvements, not creating new features, which is awesome, because for the first year, it was just new feature after new feature, which is, it's a recipe for disaster. So, interviews, just talking to people. I've gone to Twitter, I've gone through our NPS comments, thousands of them. I emailed most of the people who said it was okay to contact them. We have support channels, feature requests. If you have a support team or sales team or marketing team, you could probably get people from them. And just a side note, as a designer who doesn't have, if you don't have access to customers, but you do have support and sales, they can be your best buddies. So interviews, it's as simple as, I email somebody, I offer them $25 Amazon gift certificate, get them on Skype or HipChat or whatever and talk to them for an hour or so. Really good stuff. Customer visits, if you can actually get out and see customers and people who are using your designs where they live or where they work, that's even better. I mentioned talking to sales and support. Then these are a couple tools that I've used in the past. They're services. Intercom.io is something that you can use for in-product. Essentially, you get in contact with customers that way. And then Optimizely is something that we do. It's less research and more testing. We do it quite a bit. It's relatively easy. It allows you to A/B test. You can't do, I guess you probably could do some things that are pretty robust. I've just used it for pretty basic things. But at the end of the day, getting out and talking with users is huge. All right, so understanding and reducing complexity. So this is a lot of our users, a lot of times when they're talking about dealing with Jira. Right? They're just confused, they don't know where to go. And what you really want is you don't want to remove things from them, you want them to feel like this. This is what complexity should get you. So the point with showing those two things is the goal shouldn't necessarily be reducing complexities because complexity can be a good thing. It's hard to say, but it can be a good thing. I look at it more like understanding what people are having problems with, understanding complexity, and then increasing clarity or ease of use. I use clarity because I like that term better than simplicity, because simplicity also kind of implies that you dump something down. So, and at Atlassian we split this into, well, not everybody does this, but I found this useful. We split it into 3 different things. Task complexity, which would be like in Jira, for example, I can't figure out how to give Emma's one of our personas, permission to see this page. So it's just, I need to do something, I can't figure out how to do it. It's pretty straightforward. Then there's navigation complexity, which is sort of like, I can't figure out where to go to change somebody's permission. Another thing at Atlassian, we get a lot of these, because we have complicated menus and navigation and systems, so we get that a lot. And then the last one is kind of the hardest one, and that's concept complexity. So that's like saying when it's permissions, it's like saying, I don't understand what these page permissions are, or even why I would use them. So the way that and again, this is kind of tied back to user research. You have to talk to people to kind of get this stuff. The idea of, this is something that I struggle with a lot, I know it was mentioned in the keynote, the idea of, I use this software every day, I know what's wrong with it, so I work on Bitbucket, they all use it, we build Bitbucket on Bitbucket, so they're, but the engineers know the backend, they know everything, they know why, they know the page permissions, they know how it's coded, they know why it's done a certain way, so it's harder for them to kind of grasp why people wouldn't they're all very smart and they're very engaged, so they do get it, but at the same time, they have to talk to people and they have to see it for themselves to actually kind of understand what it is that's going wrong. So I've been reading this book recently called Designing Products People Love. It just came out. I'm not all the way through with it. It's by Scott Burke, I think is how you say his name, but he does this thing that he calls a pain matrix, which I think is really kind of interesting. And I've sort of started combining that with those 3 different types of complexity when I'm talking to people. And so essentially what you do is you talk to them, and if it's something that's high frequency or high pain, you put it in the upper right quadrant. Low frequency, low pain is in the lower left. And it sort of helps you prioritize maybe what something that might be too complex and actually need to be worked on versus something that's like, they do this once when they're signing up and it's not really that big of a deal. So he sort of describes it like this. When they're anxious or confused, they're up on the right. When they're bored, they're down on the left. Dislike and irritation, it's okay, but it's kind of annoying. So what I do in my research is I sketch this out, and when I hear things that I think fit into one of those, I'll write it in there. And we look at all of this stuff. I mean, this doesn't dictate what we do on our roadmaps, but it just kind of gives us a way to prioritize because you can't work on everything. So anyways, it's a good book so far. It's an interesting way to plot that stuff. And then we've also come up with this thing, these 4 different things that are kind of a guideline on how you can approach some of these problems. Excuse me. Streamlining navigation, essentially removing options. If you've ever looked at Jira, there's options everywhere. So, that's one thing. Removing things. We use a lot of kind of click tracking things in conjunction with other types of research. And sometimes you can make a case for just pulling something. Like this never gets used, or it's used so rarely that we're gonna talk about getting rid of it. And that's actually a good sort of design principle that I found anyways. Removing things is generally, as long as you don't remove something that people really care about, like Bitbucket did recently. We removed people's custom avatars and they freaked out. But not that many people use them. The thing is, you don't always know. The people that use them love them, so they're maybe going to. Consolidation. We see this in a lot where people go to 2 different spots in a UI to do the same thing. You might talk about figuring out which one is easier and just going with that and removing the other one. Because the more you can remove, the more clarity the rest of what you have in your interface will show up. And then personalizing. It's got an S because I work with Aussies. They spell it that way. And that's just, if there's any way that you can build some sort of way for somebody to customize an interface or customize an experience for themselves. I mean, I'm talking in terms of software, but I mean, it can apply to anything. All right, so the last thing, this is kind of the fun part. This has been a big thing at any big company that I know about recently, and that's design systems. Style guides, frameworks, you see companies publishing these things all the time. We have one at Atlassian, we have one at Salesforce. They're a lot of work, but I think that when you're talking about showcasing the value of design, this is less about teaching somebody design and more about enabling them to take all of the good wins that you've had as a designer and implement them in sort of a safe way, while teaching a little bit along the way. So at Atlassian, at one point, I don't remember exactly when it was before I got there, there was 40 different styles of drop-downs. That's confusing. And we're just talking about the style. I mean, there's probably other problems there. 40. There's probably like 35 now, but there was 40. No, I don't know. But anyway, so at one point somebody realized that was a huge problem. Just the implementation of design was not consistent. And that's another thing we see in comments when we talk to people a lot. And I've seen this at not only big companies, but any sort of big product that's kind of been going on for a period of time, you start to see that inconsistencies pop up and users notice them. So they came up with a style guide or design system called the ADG, Atlassian Design Guidelines. It's out on the web. You can look at it. Other companies have done this. This is our UI library, also out on the web. MailChimp. Theirs is interesting because they cover a lot of brand stuff, but they also talk about, they have what they call voice and tone, which is how they talk to their customers, which I thought was really cool. We don't have that strictly at Atlassian, but we do have some sort of guidelines around that as well. eBay's got this design playbook that's really pretty cool. And then Salesforce just released a new version of theirs called Lightning. I actually spent about a year working on this thing. I was in charge of modals, drop-downs, other things. The reason why these things are important for a lot of these companies is because not only are they building products, they're building platforms. So other people are using this, or other parts of the company are using their platform to build their own products. So on top of just having consistent products, they also potentially, like Salesforce, for example, they have so many people across their development timeline or whatever, I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of people that are using their platform to build products of their own. So they've built these systems to help make sure that they have a consistent user experience. I forget the company, but the gentleman who came up at the end, the sponsor, was talking about how they wanted to have a consistent experience across their products. A lot of companies are realizing the value in that. And that's why you get these things. So what is a design system? It can be about your brand, the look and feel, how you use the logo, colors, that kind of thing. It can be about the user interface. A lot of ours at Atlassian is this kind of stuff. It's product. It's about, if you're going to have a destructive action, make sure you use a modal that looks and acts like this with these types of words in it. Copy, the voice and tone, and again, just having a consistent voice through your interface to your customers. Code, so like the frameworks and UI. The big benefit here is this allows non-designers, for example, like a lot of our front-end engineers, they can get a prototype of something that we don't necessarily have time to focus on design-wise. They can get it 80% of the way there, and then we can come in and pair. I do a lot of pairing, where I sit down with a front-end engineer, and I know my way around, but I don't do a lot of the coding because a lot of it would have to be refactored if I did it. So I'll sit down and kind of we'll work through it to get that polished down. And there's more. So that's kind of the bits and pieces that make up a design system. A lot of other people also have a lot of high-level stuff, like principles and that kind of thing. So there's that as well. We do that on kind of a team-by-team basis at Atlassian. I don't think we have anything. We might have some stuff that kind of overarches the entire company, but each team kind of has their own design principles. I do have a slide for that. So a good way to look at these is it's living design documentation. And the reason why I say living is because it's something that needs to evolve over time. You can't just do it and publish it and let it alone. It needs to change as the needs of your customers, as the needs of the teams and the products go, and your teams get bigger and bigger. So, a few things that they're good for. I've already mentioned quality, consistency. They can make you faster. You spend time solving real problems, and not so much what color does this button need to be, or what's the border radius on that thing. They provide autonomy to, again, engineers, or maybe, for example, inexperienced designers who don't know the product very well. They don't know why certain decisions were made. Well, this stuff can kind of allow you to focus on solving real problems and spend less time, bike shedding. What color are we going to paint the bike shed? You've got to build the shed first. So how do you get started with this kind of stuff? You should have somebody who's in charge of it. If you don't, it gets, design by committee, a lot of people should be involved, but you kind of need somebody to kind of run it, or a group of people. It shouldn't be a big group, maybe half a pizza size. Then the next step is just to do a lot of research, go look at what you have, find where you're missing pieces, and then document that. We have, on Confluence, we have pages and pages and pages about our design system. Some things are very solid, some things are not, some things are missing. You identify, like, for example, I wanted to do a copy and paste UI as a convenience, you know, one of those little, you click a button and it copies it. We didn't have anything for that. I didn't have time to like put it into the design system, so I just noted it. You know, it's like, it's something to be done. It's kind of like, it's kind of like a Wikipedia type of thing. Some things are more fleshed out than others. You promote it, make sure people know about it. I'm gonna go through this pretty quick, so I'm almost running out of time. Planning for change, so, you know, this is just to say that you can't leave it kind of stale. You have to actually have a process in place for, say a designer has an improvement on one of your patterns or something that you have done. They have to have the ability to get that vetted and then eventually published or killed, depending on what it is. And a few quick tips. Start small, use lots of examples, provide resources, be explicit but also flexible, especially if you have a lot of designers, they're going to want to break it. You know, you've got to be flexible for that. You don't want to roll everything out all at once. A big change can be hard on your users. And then making it public is kind of like an accountability thing. If you have it public, your users can see it, they can kind of understand where you're going with it. It's also a good kind of publicity thing if you're trying to promote it throughout your organization. So, just real quickly, I've covered inclusive design, research and testing, complexity and design systems. I know I covered a whole lot of stuff. Hopefully you guys aren't like really worn out, but that's me. Thank you very much, and I've got a couple minutes for questions if anybody has any.
I have a question about, earlier on you talked about decision registers.
Okay, the question was about decision registers. So the reason why we use those is we have a lot of stakeholders, and I've got some very big projects. For example, I'm working on an identity systems project that it crosses multiple products that all need to be kind of on the same page. So we have designers for multiple products, PMs for multiple products. We get in and we start talking about the pros and cons of doing something a certain way, or hunting on a particular feature. Like, I don't have a specific example. A decision register is just a way to kind of put that down on paper. It's a thing that's inside of Confluence, which if you're not familiar with Confluence, it's like we use it in a different way, but it's kind of sort of like an intranet wiki type thing used for documentation. And so a decision register is just a way to kind of ask a question, get everybody's opinions, come up with solutions or answers, and then record what you decided to do. So, you know, we'll say, yeah, if there's 4 different ways to do something, we're like, yes, we're doing A, it's marked as decided, and then we close the book on it. And so that way, in a month, when we go, didn't we decide to do X? Well, we pull up the decision register, and yeah, we did, you know. And a lot of times it's good for if something gets telephoned, you know, like down the line, or if something in implementation gets done differently than what we all had expected. We go back and, oh yeah, we did decide to do that, and you know, then we can make decisions based on that. Back there.
So I've got a question. I'm a designer, and I know I've worked a little bit with developers, but there's been a lot of talk about kind of the way to meet in the middle. And I think that it's important in the design process to allow sort of that space for, like, you know, a lot of iterations and not to sort of close yourself into a particular design choice. But I also know that on the developer side, there are a lot of restrictions that you know, have to be placed because of all the backend code and stuff that, you know, I'm not really privy to or I don't really understand. So how do you see, like, designers approaching the design process, understanding the restrictions of development without actually restricting the sort of creative space of the design process?
Yeah. First of all, I think that's a difficult balance to strike, and I think there's a few different things. One, I think including engineers at the start of the process helps because they can call out concerns early enough that you can at least have them in the back of your head. I think another thing is, you know, just going back to my beginner's mind thing, like pairing and getting to know your product and your code base so that you kind of already have an idea. I mean, that's something that takes, I think, a lot of time. You know, it's not something you're going to have right away. And then also creating like safe spaces for like blue sky and like ideation. I think there's a talk maybe after this one about ideation. You know, we do a lot of that. We do a lot of envisioning where we don't worry about it. We don't worry about what can and can't be done. We get in a room, usually we invite engineers and PMs and other people, and we tell them, like, check your knowledge of the code base at the door, because we're going to get crazy in here. And when we do that, and a lot of that stuff might not get built or used tomorrow, but it gets referred back to a lot. In fact, at Atlassian, we've had a full product. We have a service desk product, which is built on Jira, that came out of a similar type of thing. We have something at Atlassian that we call Ship It, which is once a quarter, we just take 2 days off, and it's like a big hackathon. And it's kind of like that. It's like we try to break things. So we have like things in place to allow for that. Hopefully that answers your question. Right here.
Do you have any design advice for keeping clarity on data-intensive applications? We have more than 500 screens.
Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of want to say like the same things, but yeah. I think obviously if you do get to a point where there's diminishing returns. Something that, for example, that I worked on is I worked on an interface for people to build custom webhooks into Bitbucket. And when you get into the logging and QA part of that interface, we cannot remove information. We want to be able to, they're reading through log files, for example. There are some things that we did to make that easier, and they follow the kind of same principles. We tried to not have anything there that didn't need to be there, et cetera, et cetera. But at some point, we did get to a point where we were like, this needs to be raw data that they can just browse through. Now, we also made that decision because it wasn't something that most people were going to see. So there's that balance of like power versus another way to describe it is in an admin section of our product. It's not going to be as easy to use because you cannot take that power away. So it's like inherently complicated. That's why I didn't put reduced. That's why I struck out reduced complexity, because there does come a point when you suffer diminishing returns, start to take things away from people. I know that's not a really good answer to your question, but without understanding the actual details, I wouldn't really know exactly what to do in your case.
Our company is always struggling with managing that information on an iPad screen. So we have lots of restrictions. So we're always, that's our constant struggle.
Yeah. You have the form factor in addition. Yeah. So I think I could do one more question if anybody has one. And if not, I'll just say thanks and wrap it up because it's 11. Thank you.